I saw his smile. It wasn't the smile of a victor, but the smug grin of ownership. He stood on stage, taking credit for everything I had built over 18 months, every line of code, every fragile financial model. He called me our brilliant numbers cruncher, as if I were just a calculator in a dress. My blood didn't boil. Instead, a cold, sharp resolve settled deep in my bones. He wanted a game of power. Fine. I would teach him what real power felt like. My name is Sarah Vance, and I stood in the wings of the grand ballroom at Crescent Tower, watching my future burn. On stage, bathed in a spotlight that felt like an accusation, was my fiancé, Marcus Thorne. He was presenting Project Titan, the culmination of 2 years of my life, of sleepless nights and relentless work that had pushed the boundaries of financial modeling. Ethereum Solutions was celebrating a revolution, and I was its ghostwriter. The CEO, a man who had never once looked me in the eye for more than 2 seconds, was clapping Marcus on the back. The board members were nodding, their faces alight with the promise of 9-figure profits. Marcus, handsome and impossibly charming in his custom suit, soaked it all in. Then he gestured vaguely toward my direction. "And of course," he said, his voice booming through the sound system. I couldn't have managed the technical side without the tireless efforts of my fiancé. Sarah, she's our dedicated technical support, a real genius with the numbers. Dedicated technical support. The words hung in the air, stripping me of my title, my expertise, my identity as a strategic analyst. He had reduced 2 years of architectural design, of building a predictive engine so complex it was practically alive, to the role of a helper. The applause was deafening, but all I could hear was the click of a lock on a cage he had been building around me for months. Later, during the reception, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and self-congratulation, the true nature of his betrayal became brutally clear. He was holding court with Julian Croft, a senior partner from a firm we desperately needed to win over. I approached them, a fixed smile on my face, ready to play the supportive fiancé. "Sarah, there you are," Marcus said, draping an arm around me. It felt heavy, proprietary. Julian was just asking about the strategic framework of Titan. He looked at Croft, his expression one of paternal indulgence. "Sarah handled all the foundational calculations, of course. She's brilliant at it. But to be a partner, you need a certain kind of strategic vision. You need to see the whole chessboard, not just the individual pieces." He smiled down at me, a public pat on the head. In that moment, I saw the entire con. He had never intended for me to be his partner, in business or in life. He had kept me siloed, fed me just enough praise to keep me working, all while positioning himself to take sole ownership of our shared creation. My mind flashed back to all the late-night meetings I was excluded from. The strategy sessions he claimed were just high-level politics, nothing you need to worry about. It had all been a calculated, deliberate erasure of my contribution. I excused myself. A few minutes later, he found me by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Chicago skyline. The party was a muted roar behind him. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone impatient. "You called me technical support. Marcus. You told a potential partner I lacked strategic vision." He sighed, a sound of pure exasperation, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper meant only for me. "You were the bridge to get me here. Sarah, don't mistake your position." There was no flicker of remorse in his eyes. Only cold, hard ambition. The shock I expected to feel never came. Instead, a profound and terrifying clarity washed over me. I wasn't hurt. I was armed. Tears were a luxury I couldn't afford. A fight was a waste of energy. What I felt was the quiet, calm certainty of a decision being made. He would not just fail. He would be dismantled, piece by piece, using the very tools I had built. I turned and walked away without another word. I collected my coat and stepped out of the gleaming, sterile lobby of Crescent Tower and into the raw Chicago night. A sudden downpour was lashing the streets, the icy rain soaking through my silk dress in seconds, but I barely felt it. I pulled out my phone, my fingers moving with purpose. I scrolled to a name I hadn't needed in years and pressed call. "Ilara Reed's office." "It's Sarah Vance," I said, my voice steady against the howling wind. "Tell her I need an appointment. First thing tomorrow morning. It's urgent." Oh, I hung up and got into my car, the engine humming to life. On the passenger seat was my briefcase. I opened it and pushed aside a stack of files. Underneath was a small, matte black external hard drive. It was encrypted, air-gapped, and utterly untraceable. It contained the original, unadulterated source code for Project Titan. It also contained 3 alternate versions of the model, each one exponentially more powerful and efficient than the one Marcus had just presented as his masterpiece. He thought he had stolen my work. He had no idea he'd only taken the decoy. The next morning, I initiated a strategic withdrawal. It's a business term for pulling resources out of a failing market to cut losses and reallocate assets. In this case, the failing market was my life with Marcus. There was no room for emotion, only execution. The first asset to be reallocated was me. Before he even woke up, I was on the phone with the leasing agent for the condo we were supposed to move into next month. I cited a sudden and unforeseen change in partnership dynamics and terminated the application. I forfeited the $2,000 deposit without a second thought. It was a small price for freedom. Then, while he was in the shower, humming off key, I packed. Not clothes, not memories. I packed value, my personal financial records, the award I won in graduate school, my grandfather's watch, and the encrypted hard drive. I moved them to a small, prepaid storage unit in a suburb he'd never heard of. The wedding planning came next. I opened my laptop and composed a single, sterile email, BCCing the caterer, the florist, and the venue. Due to a necessary recalibration of personal priorities, I wrote, "All planning for the Vance Thorne wedding is on hold indefinitely. I will be in contact should the project timeline be reinstated." Project timeline. I was liquidating my future and framing it as a postponed product launch. At the office, the shift was subtle but absolute. I arrived at 9 a.m. sharp and left at 5 p.m. on the dot. When Marcus sent a frantic instant message at 6:30 that evening asking for a quick data pull for a follow-up meeting, I ignored it. He called my cell. I let it go to voicemail. He texted, "Where are you? Need that analysis ASAP." I waited until the next morning at 9:01 to reply via my work email. "Good morning, Marcus. Per standard company policy, requests for data analysis require a formal ticket submission with a minimum 24-hour turnaround. Please let me know if you would like me to initiate that process. Best, Sarah." He stormed over to my desk an hour later, his face a mask of disbelief. "What was that joke?" "I'm merely adhering to official protocol," I said, not looking up from my screen. "It ensures all work is properly tracked and prioritized." He scoffed, assuming it was a petty, temporary snit. He was too consumed by the glow of his newfound success to see the ground crumbling beneath his feet. He saw a pouting fiancé, not a strategist executing a hostile exit. This ignorance was his critical weakness, and I would exploit it. That evening, I bought a new, leather-bound journal. It was not for feelings. It was a logbook. I documented everything with the dispassionate precision of a lab technician. Date, time, incident, verbatim quotes, his condescending remarks in meetings, the emails where he took credit for my work, the 12 phone calls I ignored, the passive-aggressive comments about my newfound work-life balance. It was data, and I was building a case for divorce. Yes, but also a case for a different kind of settlement. My next move was to activate a dormant asset. I sent a single-line email to an old contact from my university days, a man who now ran a boutique venture capital firm called Gallia Capital. "Ethan," I wrote, I have a proprietary alpha model with a 95% predictive accuracy. Are you interested in a new portfolio acquisition? He responded in less than 10 minutes, always. I knew I couldn't sue Marcus for intellectual property. Ethereum's employment contract was an iron cage, but I didn't need to sue him for what he had. I was going to make it obsolete, and that was possible because of a secret I had buried deep in the architecture of Project Titan. Months ago, during the final stress tests, I had discovered a critical vulnerability, a potential feedback loop in the algorithm that could cause catastrophic miscalculations under specific volatile market conditions. I presented it to Marcus. He told me to ignore it, calling it a one-in-a-million edge case that would delay the launch. So I didn't fix it. Instead, I built a bypass around it, a hidden kill switch that only I knew how to activate. But more importantly, I used the flaw as a blueprint. I learned from it. The version of Titan on my encrypted hard drive, the real version, was not only immune to that flaw, it was designed to exploit it. It could predict the flaw in other systems and leverage their inevitable collapse. Marcus thought he had stolen a golden goose. He had no idea the egg was designed to shatter, and I was the only one who knew exactly when. Alara Reed was not a woman who wasted time on pleasantries. Her office was a testament to brutal efficiency, all sharp angles, chrome, and smoked glass, overlooking the Chicago River from 40 floors up. She listened intently as I laid out the timeline, her fingers steepled, her eyes missing nothing. "The intellectual property angle is messy," she said when I finished, her voice as crisp as the starched collar of her shirt. "Ethereum's lawyers will bury you in discovery, and Marcus will paint you as the scorned woman trying to sabotage his success. We can't prove he stole it if your name was never officially on the project charter." "I have no intention of suing him for Project Titan," I stated calmly. "Titan is already obsolete." Alara raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Go on." "I'm developing a new platform. Let's call it Project Optimization. It's based on the original, superior architecture of Titan, the one that exists only on a drive in my possession. While he's busy selling a flawed prototype, I'll be launching the finished product." A slow smile spread across her face. "I see. So the divorce isn't about getting your half of the condo. It's about leverage. It's about applying pressure to his professional reputation at a strategically critical moment." I corrected. "He's the new golden boy of Ethereum. A messy, contentious divorce, complete with discovery requests for his financial records, will tarnish that image. It will make the board nervous." "And what happens when he gets nervous?" she asked, leaning forward. "He makes mistakes," I replied. The next day, I finalized the deal with Gallia Capital. The terms were aggressive. They would provide all the necessary seed funding, secure server infrastructure, and a legal firewall in exchange for 40% equity in the new company. It was a steep price, but it bought me speed and secrecy, two assets more valuable than cash. With the capital secured, I established our base of operations. It was an anonymous rented office space in a bland corporate park 20 miles outside the city. There was no sign on the door, and the network was a closed loop, completely isolated from the public internet. My team was small, just 2 freelance developers I had worked with before, both brilliant coders I had personally mentored and helped land lucrative contracts in the past. They trusted me without question and worked for a combination of cash and a generous slice of future profits. We weren't just a startup, we were a Black Ops team. We worked with a singular, relentless focus. While Marcus was giving interviews and accepting awards, we were gutting his prized project. We rebuilt the core algorithm, integrating the very failsafe I had designed to bypass the flaw, turning it into the central processing unit. Project Optimization wasn't just a better version of Titan, it was a predator designed to hunt it. It was during this intense period that I found another weapon. I was methodically disentangling my finances from his, a tedious but necessary process. I noticed an odd charge on a joint account, a payment to a corporate credit card. His corporate card. A little digging revealed it was no accident. In the weeks since the Titan launch, Marcus had become sloppy, drunk on his success. He had started using his Ethereum card for personal expenses, a $3,000 suit from Savile Row, courtside tickets to a Bulls game, a ridiculously expensive watch I knew was meant to impress Julian Croft. It was a pattern of small-scale embezzlement, a vulnerability in his financial armor. I took screenshots, documented every transaction, and added it to my logbook. He must have started to feel my absence, the operational void I had left behind. My phone buzzed incessantly with texts, first demanding, then confused, and finally, almost pleading. One night, a message came through that simply said, "Sarah, what is this? Why won't you answer me? I thought we were a team." I looked at the message for a long moment, feeling nothing but the cold, satisfying click of a chess piece moving into place. I typed a single sentence and hit send. "I am adhering to the priorities you set." It took less than a week for the facade to crack. Marcus was a fantastic salesman, a charismatic frontman, but he was a man who only knew how to read the cover of the book, not the intricate text inside. And I had written the book. The first sign was an email I was CC'd on, a gentle reminder from the head of implementation regarding missing data parameters for the Project Falcon integration. It was a simple query I could have answered in my sleep. It took Marcus 2 days to respond, and his answer was wrong, triggering a polite but firm correction from the client's technical lead. Then the calls started. My phone, which I kept on my desk, began its frantic dance. Marcus Thorne, Marcus Thorne, Marcus Thorne. He called 12 times in one day. I watched the screen light up, each incoming call a tiny flare of his mounting panic. He was discovering all the small fires I used to put out before he even smelled the smoke. After the 10th missed call, I sent him a single professional email. "Marcus, my current project load does not allow for ad hoc interruptions. Please follow protocol and schedule a meeting if you require assistance." His desperation wasn't just professional, it was personal. I had been the managing partner of his entire life. 2 weeks into my strategic withdrawal, I saw him waiting for the elevator. His suit, usually tailored to perfection, looked slept in. His hair was flat, his eyes were bloodshot, and he had the distinct look of a man who had just realized he didn't know his dry cleaner's address and that groceries didn't magically appear in the refrigerator. He was the toast of Ethereum, the new visionary, and he was subsisting on vending machine coffee and stale granola bars. The real blow, however, came from outside the building. My new partners at Gallia Capital were surgical. A carefully worded article appeared in a niche but highly respected financial journal. It didn't name Ethereum, but it methodically questioned the stability of new generation financial models that looked suspiciously identical to Titan. It raised hypothetical, highly technical questions about the model's sustainability questions that I, of course, had supplied. The article found its way to Ethereum's largest client. Suddenly, they were expressing skepticism about the Titan integration. They wanted a full review, a deep dive into the algorithmic assumptions. They wanted Marcus to explain the math I had written. This sent him into a full-blown tailspin, and he did exactly what I predicted he tried to toggle from tyrant to lover. A text message lit up my phone. "Sarah, I know you're angry. I've been under a lot of pressure. I've been an idiot. Let me make it up to you. Dinner tonight, 9 p.m. Our old place. I have something for you." I felt a cold flicker of amusement. He thought this was a lover's quarrel. He thought my fury, my strategic pivot, was just a tantrum that could be soothed with an expensive meal. A quick check of the joint credit card we still hadn't closed confirmed it a massive charge from a high-end jeweler. He was trying to fix a structural collapse with a diamond necklace. I didn't reply to his text. Instead, I made a call. "Ilara, he has the big partner meeting with the Project Falcon team tomorrow at 4 p.m. To save the deal, I want it done then." The next day, Marcus was in the main lobby of Crescent Tower, adjusting his cuffs, clearly trying to rally his diminishing confidence for the meeting that would decide his fate. At exactly 3:45 p.m., as the client partners were stepping out of the elevator, a process server stepped in front of him. "Mr. Thorne, The man handed him a thick legal envelope. Marcus tore it open, his face draining of all color as he read the first page, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. He looked up, stunned, just in time to make eye contact with the baffled clients. His call came an hour later. I picked up. "You bitch," he screamed, his voice raw. "You think you can destroy me? You signed a non-compete. You signed an NDA. I will sue you for breach of contract. I will sue you for stealing internal data. I will drag you through the mud until you have nothing left." I held the phone, listening to the hollow echo of his threats. He was accusing me of stealing the very thing he had taken from me, threatening me with rules he had already broken. The sheer, desperate irony of it was almost funny. I let the silence stretch out, letting him burn himself out. Then, I laughed. It was not a warm sound. It was cold, sharp, and full of absolute control. And I hung up. Ethan Varga did not operate from a conventional office. We met in the library of an old private club, a room paneled in dark wood and smelling of leather and history. He was a man in his late 40s, sharp and still, with an unnerving ability to listen that made you feel like he was cataloging your every word for future use. "Project optimization is impressive," he began, closing the tablet on which he'd been reviewing my progress. "The architecture is clean. The predictive power is, frankly, astounding. It will bleed tight and dry within 2 quarters, but I have a question. Sarah, is your goal to build a successful competitor, or is it to make Marcus Thorne and Ethereum Solutions pay?" "The 2 goals are not mutually exclusive," I replied, my voice even. He smiled, a thin, knowing expression. "Perhaps, but one is a business plan, the other is a vendetta. I find vendettas, when properly funded, often yield a higher return on investment." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I didn't agree to fund you just because your model is brilliant. I funded you because I have a history with Ethereum's CEO, Jonathan Finch, 15 years ago. Finch used a dirty backroom deal to push my first company into bankruptcy. I've been waiting for a chance to settle that account ever since." This was new information. My personal war was a single battle in his much longer campaign. "So you want to destroy Ethereum," I stated. "Not destroy it," Ethan corrected softly. "I want to own it. Competing is slow. It gives them time to react, to pivot. I propose a more aggressive strategy, a hostile takeover." The scale of his ambition was breathtaking. I had planned to ruin Marcus. Ethan was planning to conquer a kingdom. "Ethereum is a publicly traded company. A takeover would be incredibly expensive and complex." "Not if the company is already bleeding," he countered. "Not if its largest project is about to implode, taking its most valuable client contract with it." He was talking about Project Falcon. "You mentioned they were having implementation issues. How severe are they?" Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. The client's skepticism, Marcus's panic, the frantic need for data he couldn't produce. "The Falcon contract has a 90-day integration clause," I said, thinking aloud. "There are massive, escalating financial penalties for every day they are late past that deadline. We are on day 62. Marcus can't get Titan to interface with their logistics network because he doesn't understand the back-end reconciliation protocols. I do, because I wrote them." Ethan's smile widened. "So Ethereum is on the hook for millions in penalties. Their biggest new client is about to walk, and their stock will plummet the moment that news becomes public. That sounds like a company ripe for acquisition." He then revealed the final piece. "And as it happens, Gallia Capital holds a small, overlooked portion of Ethereum's corporate debt, which we acquired last year. It comes with certain covenants. If they default on a major contract like Project Falcon, those covenants are triggered, giving us significant leverage." My objective recalibrated instantly. The mission was no longer about launching a competing product. It was about orchestrating a corporate decapitation. That night, I moved on 2 fronts. First, I compiled the evidence of Marcus's personal expenditures on the Ethereum corporate card into a neat, detailed file. I sent it to Alara Reed with a simple note: "Add this to discovery. Let's subpoena his expense reports. His petty theft was about to become a legal battering ram against his credibility. Second, I turned my attention to Ethereum's board. I knew from my time there that one of the senior board members, a man named Garrett Lowell, privately despised Marcus. He saw him as a slick salesman, not a true strategist, and had been a vocal opponent of the project's initial budget. Using an encrypted email service, I sent a one-sentence, anonymous message to a private address I knew he used. Ask Marcus to explain the algorithmic stress test simulations for Titan under high volatility market conditions, specifically the ones conducted in the fourth quarter of last year. There were no such simulations, because when I had recommended them, Marcus had dismissed the idea as a waste of time. I hadn't just set a trap. I had sent the inspector to the exact spot where I had buried the body. The Global Strategic Finance Conference in Manhattan was Marcus's stage, his last chance to quell the growing rumors about Titan's instability. Ethereum had sent him to Project Strength to dazzle investors with the charisma that had gotten him this far. He was the keynote speaker on day 2, the main event. I was in the audience, 5 rows back, an anonymous face in a sea of dark suits. My conference badge read, Sarah Vance, CEO, Viridian Dynamics, the official name of my shell company. I was not there to hide. I was there to hunt. Marcus was brilliant. I had to give him that. He spoke in sweeping, powerful statements about innovation and market disruption. He used all the right buzzwords. He showed slides with impressive upward-trending graphs that were long on visual appeal and short on verifiable data. The audience, for the most part, was eating it up. Then came the question and answer session. A man in the 3rd row stood up, a well-known analyst from a major firm. Ethan had made sure he got the first question. Mr. Thorne, a fascinating presentation. The analyst began. Could you elaborate on the core algorithmic assumptions regarding negative feedback loops? Specifically, how does Titan's architecture prevent cascading failures in a high-volatility, algorithm-driven sell-off, like the flash crash we saw 2 years ago? The question hung in the air. A surgical strike. It was my question. A flicker of panic crossed Marcus's eyes before he masked it with a confident smile. An excellent, highly technical question, he began, stalling. Our architecture is built on a foundation of robust, multi-layered risk mitigation. We leverage a synergistic approach to data validation that ensures. He was drowning in jargon. He didn't have the answer. The analyst pressed him. With respect, Mr. Thorne, could you be more specific? Are we talking about a circuit breaker? A dynamic recalibration of asset weighting? What is the actual mechanism? Silence. The confidence drained from Marcus's face, replaced by a deer-in-the-headlights stare. He looked out at the crowd, searching for a lifeline. His eyes met mine, and for a second, he looked utterly lost. That was my cue. I stood up. A cameraman, sensing a shift in the room's energy, turned his lens toward me. I was handed a microphone. Perhaps I can offer a perspective on that, I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the cavernous hall. My name is Sarah Vance, CEO of Viridian Dynamics. The challenge of cascading failures in predictive models isn't a bug to be patched. It's a fundamental architectural problem. I didn't look at Marcus. I addressed the analyst, the audience, the industry. Models like the one just described often rely on historical data, which makes them inherently vulnerable to black swan events. Our solution, which we call project optimization, doesn't just react to volatility. It anticipates the echo. It's designed around a preemptive core that identifies the preconditions for systemic risk and reallocates assets before the feedback loop even begins. It's not a shield. It's a nervous system. I laid out the core concepts in 90 seconds, providing the exact technical detail Marcus could not. I answered the analyst's question with a depth that left no doubt about my expertise. I had essentially just announced to the entire financial world that Marcus Thorne's revolutionary product was a horse and buggy, and I had just invented the sports car. This is a mischaracterization of our platform, Marcus stammered, trying to regain control. Ms. Vance is a former junior analyst at my company, and I turned to him then, my gaze cutting. Excuse me, I said, my voice dropping but losing none of its authority. This is a session on next-generation solutions, not a debate on obsolete models. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. I had not only demonstrated his incompetence, I had publicly dismissed him. The moderator, sensing blood in the water, moved to the next question, but the damage was done. Marcus had been exposed on the biggest stage in his industry. As soon as the session ended, a man intercepted me before I could take 2 steps. He was a senior partner at one of the largest investment banks on Wall Street. He ignored Marcus completely. Ms. Vance, he said, handing me his card. That was the most compelling thing I've heard in 5 years. We need to talk. Across the aisle, I saw Marcus shove his papers into his briefcase, his hands trembling with rage. He turned and practically ran from the ballroom. I watched him go, a sense of cold satisfaction settling over me. He wasn't walking to the exit. He was walking toward his phone to make 2 panicked calls, one to his lawyer and one to the CEO of the company I was about to own. The fallout from the Manhattan conference was swift and brutal. My anonymous tip to Garrett Lowell had been a spark. My public performance was a gallon of gasoline. The board of Ethereum, facing a storm of calls from anxious investors and a furious Project Falcon client, moved into damage control. They didn't call it an investigation. They called it an emergency internal audit of Project Titan. But the target was clear. Marcus was no longer the golden boy. He was the primary liability. While Ethereum's internal auditors began tearing through Marcus's work, Ilara Reed opened a second front. Armed with the evidence of his creative corporate card usage, she filed a motion in our divorce proceedings to depose him under oath regarding his financial conduct during our engagement. She argued that his misuse of company funds was a form of financial infidelity that directly impacted our shared marital assets. It was a brilliant, vicious move. His professional crisis was now inextricably linked to his personal one. He was being squeezed from both sides, and the walls were closing in. That's when his emails started. The threats were gone, replaced by a pathetic, desperate pleading. They would arrive late at night, long, rambling blocks of text filled with self-pity and revisionist history. "Sarah, I know I messed up," one began. The pressure was immense. Finch, the board, everyone was looking at me. I got carried away. I never meant to sideline you. You were always my partner, my secret weapon. Can't we talk? Just talk, I miss you. This isn't us. He wrote about the future we had planned, the house we were going to buy, the life he had so casually torched. He blamed stress, ambition, the corporate culture, everything but his own calculated betrayal. He was trying to find the man I used to love and appeal to him for mercy, but that man was a ghost, and I had no mercy left to give. For days, I ignored them. Then, after a particularly long and pitiful monologue landed in my inbox at 3 a.m, I decided it was time to terminate the channel for good. I composed my reply. It was short. I do not negotiate with individuals who have committed intellectual property theft and devalued my contributions. I wrote, "All legal inquiries will be directed through my counsel. Do not contact me again." I hit send and archived the entire thread. Meanwhile, the situation at Ethereum was deteriorating rapidly. The Project Falcon integration was a disaster. The deadline had passed, and the penalty clauses had kicked in. I had written the contract myself. I knew them by heart. It was $50,000 a day for the first week, escalating to $100,000 a day for the second. Ethereum was now bleeding over $500,000 a week, all because Marcus couldn't make my system talk to theirs. As the pressure mounted, Ethan and I made our final, quiet move. We learned through a contact that a small hedge fund, which held a $30 million tranche of Ethereum's corporate debt, was facing a liquidity crisis and needed to offload assets quickly. This wasn't just any debt. It was a high-leverage bond with strict covenants tied directly to gross revenue and client retention. A default on the Project Falcon contract would put Ethereum in direct violation of those covenants. Using Viridian Dynamics as a cutout, we bought the entire bond for pennies on the dollar. The transaction was a minor blip on the market, too small for anyone at Ethereum to notice. But it meant we were no longer just a competitor. We were their creditor. We were holding the trigger, and Marcus was doing everything in his power to hand us the bullet. The summons came on a Friday afternoon. It was a formal, chillingly polite email from Jonathan Finch, CEO of Ethereum Solutions. He requested my presence at an urgent meeting on Monday morning to address serious allegations of corporate sabotage that had been brought to his attention by Marcus Thorne. It was a formal invitation to my own execution. Marcus, cornered and desperate, was trying to make me the scapegoat for his own spectacular failure. On Monday morning, I walked through the gleaming lobby of Crescent Tower. It was the first time I had been back since the night of the Titan launch, but I did not come as a former employee. I came as a queen arriving for a coronation, flanked by Alara Reed on my right and Ethan Varga on my left. We were not a delegation of the accused. We were a raiding party. We were shown into the main boardroom. Finch sat at the head of the table, flanked by his general counsel and Garrett Lowell, the board member I had tipped off, who watched me with a look of intense, unreadable calculation. "Ms. Vance," Finch began, dispensing with any pretense of courtesy. "Mr. Thorne has provided evidence that you have systematically undermined Project Titan since your departure, using proprietary information to interfere with our client relationships. How do you respond?" "I respond with the truth," I said, my voice calm. I nodded to Alara, who placed a sleek tablet on the polished table. "What you have from Marcus is a narrative. What I have is data." I began my presentation. I showed them the original project emails, complete with metadata, and then showed them the forwarded versions from Marcus's files, where he had skillfully edited out my name and contributions. I played them voicemails Marcus had left me in the early days, messages full of casual admissions like, "Just handled the board presentation. Sarah." I positioned it as my strategic vision. Easier that way. I laid out the irrefutable, chronological proof that Marcus had executed a deliberate, systematic campaign to erase me from the project he now claimed I had sabotaged. The room was silent, the air thick with the stench of Finch's dawning horror. He knew he had been conned. "This is compelling," the general counsel finally admitted, his voice tight. "We're just getting started," Alara Reed said, her tone like chipping ice. "Mr. Finch, as of last Thursday, my client's company, Viridian Dynamics, in partnership with Gallia Capital, acquired the $30 million Ethereum bond previously held by Northgate Fund. As you know, the covenants of that bond are tied to the performance of key contracts. Given that Ethereum is currently in breach of the Project Falcon agreement and hemorrhaging $100,000 a day in penalties, you are officially in default. We are now your principal creditor." Finch's face went pale. He looked from me to Ethan, finally understanding that this was not about a disgruntled ex-employee. This was a siege. "Get Thorne in here," he snarled to his assistant. Marcus walked in a few moments later, a smug, confident look on his face. He was expecting to find me cornered, stammering out a defense. The look vanished when he saw me sitting at the boardroom table, flanked by a powerhouse lawyer and a legendary venture capitalist. He froze, his bravado evaporating, replaced by the raw, wide-eyed terror of a trapped animal. "Marcus," Finch said, his voice dangerously low. "Ms. Vance has presented some counter-evidence." "It's all lies," Marcus blurted out, his voice cracking. "She's fabricating everything. She's a vindictive ex-fiancé trying to ruin my life." I didn't say a word. I simply gave a small nod to my analyst, who was waiting by the room's main display. "One last thing," I said. "This is a screen recording I captured on my last day at Ethereum." On the massive screen, a video appeared. It was a recording of Marcus's desktop. We all watched as his cursor methodically dragged dozens of email threads, our entire collaborative history on Titan, into a folder labeled Personal Archive. It was the digital equivalent of burning evidence, irrefutable proof of his intent to hide my involvement. Garrett Lowell swore under his breath. The game was over. Finch, seeing his company about to be torn apart by a public scandal and a hostile creditor, tried to salvage the situation. "What do you want?" he asked, his eyes locked on Ethan. "We will buy back the debt. Name your price. We will pay a substantial premium." I leaned forward, answering for them both. My voice was quiet, but it filled the entire room. "I'm not interested in a premium. Jonathan, I'm not interested in cash." I looked past him, at the company I had built from the shadows, at the office that should have been mine. "My goal is not a payout," I declared. "It's control." We didn't wait for Finch to formulate a counteroffer. Within 24 hours, Viridian Dynamics, backed by the full weight of Gallia Capital, launched a formal tender offer to acquire a controlling stake in Ethereum Solutions. It was a declaration of war, broadcast across every major financial news network. The market reaction was instantaneous and savage. Our press release was a masterclass in corporate assassination, simultaneously announcing our bid while leaking the details of the internal audit, the Project Falcon contract breach, and the impending leadership crisis. Ethereum's stock, already weakened by the rumors, went into freefall. It lost 15% of its value by noon, hemorrhaging hundreds of millions of dollars in market capitalization. Inside Crescent Tower, it was chaos. Marcus, in a desperate bid to save himself, tried to rally the board members still loyal to him. He initiated a classic poison pill defense, attempting to pass an emergency resolution that would flood the market with new shares if our takeover bid reached a certain threshold, diluting our position and making the acquisition prohibitively expensive. He was playing checkers on a chessboard I had designed. I knew the corporate bylaws better than he did because I had used them to structure the financing for a deal 2 years prior. I pointed Ethan to an obscure covenant in the company charter, a clause I myself had drafted that prohibited any material change to the share structure while the company was in default with a primary creditor. As their primary creditor, we had the right to veto his poison pill. Ethan's lawyers filed the injunction. Marcus's last line of defense crumbled before it was even built. As the corporate battle raged, the personal one concluded with a quiet, devastating finality. Ilara Reed served Marcus's legal team with the final divorce settlement proposal, bolstered by the irrefutable proof of financial misconduct and what she legally termed a pattern of calculated emotional and professional abuse. Our position was absolute. He would lose any claim to our shared assets, be responsible for his own significant legal fees, and walk away with nothing but the expensive suits he'd bought with a corporate card. He was being liquidated on all fronts. That afternoon, I met with Jonathan Finch alone, at his request, in a neutral location, a sterile conference room at an airport hotel. He looked 10 years older than he had on Monday. "You've backed me into a corner, Sarah," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. "You cornered yourself when you put your faith in a charismatic fraud instead of a competent strategist," I replied, my voice devoid of sympathy. "I'm here to offer you a choice. Your board can accept our tender offer, which I assure you is more than generous given the circumstances. It will mean a quiet, orderly transition. I will salvage the Project Falcon contract, stabilize the company, and your shareholders will retain some value." "And the alternative?" he asked. "The alternative is that you refuse," I said, leaning forward. "And I will instruct my lawyers to call in our debt. We will force you into bankruptcy. Project Falcon will sue you for breach of contract, and other clients will follow. Your company's collapse will be a very public, very bloody spectacle. And Marcus Thorne's fraudulent conduct, which happened under your watch, will be the subject of regulatory investigations for years to come. Your choice, Jonathan." He didn't need time to think. He knew he was beaten. But Marcus had one last, pathetic move to make. Later that night, I received an automated security alert on my personal laptop. The source IP address was scrambled, but the digital signature was sloppy. It was Marcus. In a final act of suicidal desperation, he was attempting to brute force his way through Ethereum's old network, trying to find and destroy the offshore servers where he assumed I was housing project optimization. He had no idea I'd migrated the real project weeks ago. What he was attacking was a decoy, a ghost server I had left behind. And as his useless attack continued, he unknowingly tripped a series of digital tripwires I had set before I resigned silent alarms that not only blocked his access but also meticulously logged his every keystroke, documenting his illegal intrusion attempt with perfect prosecutable clarity. He was no longer just a failed executive, he was now a felon, and he was creating the evidence that would bury him. The board meeting was a formality, faced with financial ruin, a massive client lawsuit, and a creditor who held a gun to their head. The vote to accept our tender offer was unanimous. Ethereum Solutions was mine. I returned to Crescent Tower a week later. I didn't enter through the employee turnstiles. I walked in, flanked by my transition team, and was met in the lobby by the remaining board members. There was no applause, just the quiet, terrified respect of a conquered territory. I didn't go to my old desk. I went to the top floor, to the sprawling corner office that overlooked Lake Michigan, and I called my first emergency meeting. Then, I summoned Marcus. He was brought to the office he had so proudly inhabited for less than 2 months. When he walked in, I was already seated behind the massive mahogany desk, his nameplate already replaced with mine. He looked small, hollowed out. The fight was gone, leaving only a gray, defeated shell. "Sarah," he started, his voice a dry rasp. "You'll address me as Ms. Vance," I said, my voice quiet. I pushed a thin folder across the desk. "This is your severance agreement. It is non-negotiable." He opened it, his face, already pale, turned ashen. "This is nothing. A single month's pay. No bonus. No stock options." "You're fortunate to be getting anything at all," I said. "You'll also note the non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. It is comprehensive, and it is ironclad." He looked up, a flicker of his old arrogance sparking in his eyes. "You can't do this. I built Project Titan. I'm the face of this company. The investors. You." I interrupted, my voice cutting through his. "Built nothing. You were a liability." I pushed a second folder across the desk. This one was thicker. "This is a detailed analysis, prepared by my new team, of the damage your strategic vision did to Titan. Your unauthorized code changes, your dismissal of critical stress tests. You didn't just steal the project. Marcus, you nearly broke it. You cost this company millions before you even launched." He stared at the report, his hands trembling. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city. "You told me I wasn't in your league," I said, my voice calm, conversational. "You said I was just the help, a numbers cruncher who didn't understand the big picture. What now?" "Marcus, I don't just have your job. I have your company. I have your career. I have the entire legacy you tried to steal from me." I turned back to him. This was never about petty revenge. This was a repossession of stolen property. He shook his head, speechless. "You should know," I added, walking back to the desk, "that I am aware of every illegal act you've committed, the embezzlement on the corporate card, the payoffs to silence your critics, and, of course, the attempted network intrusion last week. The server logs are very detailed." His eyes widened in genuine terror. He finally understood. "I kept that information from the board," I said. "I kept it from the SEC. A public scandal would have hurt the employees who did nothing wrong, and it would have complicated the transition. I chose to protect them. But the evidence is secure. It is my insurance policy. So you will sign that agreement, and you will disappear. If I ever hear your name in a financial paper again, if you so much as imply any wrongdoing on my part, I will release those logs. Am I clear?" He picked up the pen with a shaking hand. He didn't say another word. He just signed his name. his signature a frantic, illegible scrawl. He was completely, utterly broken, not by a rival, but by the person he had underestimated the most. He left the room. I stood in the silence for a long moment, feeling not a rush of triumph, but the profound, quiet relief of a heavy weight being lifted. The war was over. The value I had been forced to prove had finally been acknowledged by the only person who mattered me. I picked up my phone and buzzed the front desk. "This is Sarah Vance. Have the photograph of Marcus Thorne in the executive lobby removed. Immediately." I hung up, closing that chapter, and for the first time in 2 years, I began to think about what came next. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments below so we can connect, and be sure to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people.